family, and your friends. You'll be helping to shut out impaired driving.
Visit ArriveAlive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive. Drive sober.
You're watching Rogers TV. This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Her Story, the show to encourage more women to explore the possibility of using their skills and talents by participating in leadership roles within our community. I'm Tiffany James, and I have the pleasure of hosting this program. Her Story is here to encourage women in our community to actively engage and use their voice to bring attention to issues they are passionate about, with the hope that we will all get more involved. Please welcome my guest today, Jill Paterson, manager of the Grey Roots Museum and Archives here in Grey County. Jill has been the manager of Grey Roots Museum and Archives since April 2020. Previously, she worked with the City of Toronto's Museums and Heritage Services, managing diverse cultural programs, exhibitions, and events. Jill also held leadership roles at Historica Canada, overseeing programs like the Memory Project and Heritage Minutes. She holds 2 MAs in Public History and History and has experience ranging from international internships to historical interpretation at Canadian landmarks. To say Jill is a historian may be a bit of an understatement. Welcome, Jill, and thank you for joining me today. I'm excited to hear your story.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Tiffany.
So, Jill, can you tell me a little bit about your background and what led to your interest in history?
Yeah, so I grew up in Newfoundland. My family immigrated there from Scotland in the 80s. And I think growing up in Newfoundland's made me really appreciate what makes a place unique and special. Newfoundlanders are really good at celebrating themselves, and but I think it's served me well. Like I'll come to a place like Grey Bruce, and you can't deny the beauty here either, and the uniqueness of the people and the communities, and so I think that's helped. And you know, I always had an interest in history in school. I love stories. I love reading. And history is just like a different kind of story, really, based on truth. So I always had great teachers and got interested that way. But so that's kind of how I got started.
So what brought you from Newfoundland to Ontario? School?
School, basically. Newfoundland in the sort of like late 90s, early 2000s was not a place where you felt like there was a lot of opportunity. And so unfortunately, a lot of people my age left and came to places like Ontario to go to school and pursue work experiences. And I just got sort of caught up in Ontario. So I've been here for quite a long time now.
Now Ontario has that effect.
Yeah.
It is yours to discover.
Exactly.
Can you tell me a little bit about the main influences in your life? Was there anyone in your life that was also interested in history that made you want to pursue it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always influenced by our family, and definitely my grandfather is a great example of that. He was someone who, he would see like a building, like a government building, and he would just be like, let's go pop in here. And, who knows if he's allowed, but he would just let himself in, poke around. He was always really curious, and definitely a big influence on me. My family, I come from a long line of public servants. So there's a lot of people who wanted to take their work life to serve the community. I had a job once you mentioned in my bio, the Memory Project, which was basically a program that got Second World War veterans and other military veterans into classrooms to talk about their experiences in the service. We also traveled across the country to kind of record veterans' testimonials and record their or digitize their memorabilia. And I think working with that community definitely influenced me and made me feel like I wanted to give back and, be involved in community matters. So Yeah, I think it was a real privilege to be able to work with that group of people.
That is so interesting. My dad is a real history buff too. So he would drag us into buildings that we weren't sure we were supposed to be in as well to learn
Yeah.
more about. So I feel you there. Did you get quizzes afterwards? Because we always had quizzes afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely was one of those kids that was like dragged to every historic site and museum. And, now I'm doing it to my own kids. So I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, my kids love museums too. It's great. It's so awesome. And love your museum.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now, I wanted to touch a little bit about Grey Roots because it is such a big presence in our community. Do you have any events or anything going on there that we want to let everyone know about?
Yeah, so a big ticket coming up is in May. We have a traveling exhibit coming from the American Museum of Natural History called Dinosaurs. I think that'll be a real draw this year at the museum. I think we had dinosaurs in the past in 2015, and it was like one of our record-breaking attendance years. So we're really expecting a lot of traffic for that one. And then, this March we'll have March break programming. And then looking forward to the summer, Morriston Heritage Village will be open again. Lots of volunteers in their period costumes and that kind of thing. So yeah, lots to look forward to this year.
I know Morriston by Candlelight is one of my favorite events at Christmas time, and we go every year at that village. It just grows. Every year you go, there's a new building, and I love that. Is there any, I know there's always plans to expand it more. Do we have plans for any more buildings coming up in the near future?
There is like a vast plan for the village that was created, 20 years ago. So there's always plans for future builds, but I think right now the next things we're looking at are potentially a print shop and potentially a church as well as kind of like the next steps. But those could be years in the making. We'll have to do a lot of fundraising. We'll have to make sure we do it all responsibly. But yeah, there's always plans for expansion in the village.
Yeah, I love the new store.
Me too.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
So what led you to a career in museums? Like what brought you up to Grey County into our Grey Roots Museum? And I want to talk a little bit about Heritage Minutes because I love those and I'd like to know a bit about your involvement in those. But what led you to what brought you to Grey County and up to our Grey Roots Museum here?
Yeah, I think it's a tale I think a lot of people have where I was working. I always liked history in school. And then I got this summer job when I was, 20 at Parks Canada's National Historic Sites in Newfoundland. So Cape Spear and Signal Hill, if you've heard of those spots.
Yep.
And we had this curator come one year and he was so passionate about the accuracy of the buildings and he was so knowledgeable. I was really impressed. And I went up to him afterwards and I was like, how do I get your job? And he said, you'll never get a job like mine. They're not hiring anymore. He was like super discouraging. But I just kind of ignored his advice and figured out what were the things I needed, what was the education I needed and the experiences I needed and kind of just kept taking steps to get to where I wanted to be. I was fortunate enough to work at museums in Toronto and with Historica, as you say. But I think around pre-pandemic through 2017, 2018, 19, I was really starting to feel that pinch in Toronto that so many people feel where you think you're doing pretty well, but you can't afford a house. So you're sort of looking for other opportunities. I was definitely getting curious about moving outside the city. And then it just so happened that a position came up at Grey Roots and I was able to apply for it and it all worked out. And I arrived here right at the time that the museum was closing due to the pandemic lockdowns. And so it was kind of a tumultuous time to move. But every day, my family, we talk about how fortunate we are to be able to live up here.
Oh, I'm glad. And you're enjoying it. So 4 years now, hun. So you've got your feet wet and you're all settled in, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And the museum's just growing every year, and getting those visitors returning, and getting back to that sort of pre-pandemic time. So yeah, it's never a dull moment here for sure.
I bet. I'm like I said, I'm a big fan of Grey Roots. My family goes a lot, and we did one of our favorite exhibits in 2015 was the dinosaur exhibit. My boys were right at that ripe age for that, and every year I get a memory pop up of us in front of the dinosaurs there. It was such a great exhibit, so I'm excited to see something like that come back. So you mentioned a bit about your grandfather taking you into buildings maybe you weren't supposed to be in. Would you say he was the one that influenced you to go more in this direction of a museum and history, or who else would you say you're standing on that helps you?
Well, yeah, I think, he definitely started the spark. But it's kind of a combination of like teachers and coworkers. I think I really, I always sort of wanted to work in museums. And I think if you just take one step after the other, you find yourself getting to the goal that you're hoping to get to. I think museums it's, as I was saying, like never a dull moment. Like every day is a different issue. Sometimes it's like a budget issue or a staff issue, and sometimes it's like there's a bat in one of the buildings that we have to deal with. Who knows? Like, or we have to get those horses set up for Morrison by candlelight. So I think if you're someone who likes a change of pace all the time, it's like an amazing workplace. I would say influences now, like currently, if you look at the group of directors and senior managers in Grey County, there are a lot of really amazing women in senior management roles. So I think there's they're always like so poised and knowledgeable, and really do amazing work. So if you're ever looking for other candidates for this show, I think I'd go look at Grey County.
Actually, I just interviewed Kim a couple weeks ago.
Amazing.
It was fantastic. And I love women in power. So I love to interview. Yeah. And that's why the show.
Yes.
I like to encourage us more, because I find sometimes our voices can be silenced, or we tend to silence ourselves. So when you can showcase a woman that is doing so much within the community, that's why I do the show. So so thank you for joining me, Jill. And Kim was one of those as well. It was a great interview.
No, it's I think there's you can see the leadership style at the county is very humane and very respectful, and I think it's really it's a pleasure to work there for sure.
That's awesome. So what would you say was a pivotal moment that inspired you to become more engaged within the community by working in the museum? Did something like that make you more aware of your community?
Yeah, as I was saying, I think that memory project job really gave me a crash course in community. They're a specific community, but we ended up going across every province and territory in Canada. We had a lot of lunches in Legions. We met a lot of community members, men and women, and just hearing how they, it's cliched, but it's true, like the sacrifices they made in their young lives to fight for a cause that they, couldn't be denied. So, they really made me think twice about, the things I might be complaining about. So, that was a real sort of influential time. And then I think the more we look at our current issues, I think the museum still has a lot to do in terms of our goals for truth and reconciliation in the future. A big part of that is telling the truth about our history. So museums across the country are really in a perfect position to share those truths, even if they're hard to hear. They're sort of neutral grounds where people can come together and talk about the issues and just give them a platform, and then bring people together to discuss and kind of increase our knowledge about our past and the pieces of our history that really influence what's going on in our present. I'm curious and excited to do more on that front.
That's awesome. What a great place to learn, and a safe place to learn.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
awesome. Oh. Can you tell me a bit about the Heritage Minutes? Because I'd love to know a bit about your work on those. And correct me if I'm wrong, but these are the ones we see where it's Canada, and that is its name, correct? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
The like what is it? Like I smell burnt toast.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yes.
Yes.
So, I mean, I grew up with the Heritage Minutes as well. In the 90s, they were like on in movie theaters before and after movies. So like we were inundated. Which is amazing. And then when I was working with Historica, they had sort of just started revamping them, and they were more online, but still like an amazing high quality production. We would do, we would work with filmmakers to figure out the script and how we wanted to do things. And then we would, do movie shoots. It would be like a real production with like craft services and trailers and all the lighting. We would take over buildings and have like all the right costumes and all these kinds of things. So
that must be so much fun. Do you have one that stands out as your favorite?
Oh, that is a great question. Let me think. Yeah, there are so many. I mean, I'll say one that's based in Newfoundland, just to give you just to be a little biased, I guess. There's one that's about Marconi, who is the first transatlantic wireless signal and it went from Newfoundland to just put me on the spot. Ireland, somewhere in Ireland. Okay. And they have this great shot of like kids on Signal Hill, and they're trying to like send the message across, and it's I don't know, I really love that one. And it was in 1901, I think, when they sent that message, and it was just one letter, like basically like a Morse code. But look at where we are now, right? With wireless technology, and our whole society is based around these things. So it's pretty amazing to think about it.
That's cool. Yeah, I quote those Heritage Minutes all the time. My kids look at me like I'm crazy. It's I'm just
a village. Yes.
A village.
Yes, I know. They were pretty fun. And that's the kind of work I always wanted to do. Like I wanted to work with history, but not necessarily be a teacher or like a history professor. So how could I work with getting history out into the public and sharing those stories? So I think museums and places like Historic are the ideal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, what did you say you learned about yourself so far on your journey?
That's a good question. I'm always, evolving and trying to improve, but I think having that confidence to trust your instincts takes time and practice. And, there's ways to, I think where I think a lot about management styles and working with people and trying to be basically a good supervisor or a good boss, and how to do that respectfully and in a way that sits well with your own conscience. And I think there is a way to do that. And everyone has their own unique, genuine style of working with people, and I think trusting what works for you is okay and is doable. But it takes time to learn that, because you're always being influenced by the bosses you've had in the past or other management styles you've seen, and they're not necessarily all great styles. So you have to it takes some time to figure out what works for you and to trust your instincts,
Can we expand a little bit more on that as a woman in a management position in a leadership role? What would you say your struggles have been, if you have any?
Yeah, I think it's a funny thing, but I think if you are if you're in a good place, like if you're feeling well and positive and you've got kind of like other parts of your life organized and you come to work in a good place, you're going to be better in your job. And it's like it is win-win, like take care of yourself and you'll do better working with other people. But sometimes it like takes some practice, and it takes sometimes you forget. But I think that's sort of a lesson that I'm still learning, is like how to make sure you're doing okay as well, and
I think
to the table.
Most women, we struggle with that because there is always the work-life balance, and also where most of us unfortunately carry a lot of the household responsibilities as well. So it's sort of hard to juggle that balance. But when you can find it, and it's perfect. It's a perfect match, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I think even the smallest things, like remembering to eat breakfast so that you're more patient because your blood sugar is nice and level. Like really just like taking care of yourself can like set the stage for a much better work experience.
Oh, I never thought of that. I don't. Yeah. I'm horrible at not eating breakfast. So
I know it can be the simplest things.
Just an apple, right? I love Is there something that piques your interest that's unexplored territory for you? Something that you would like to do that you haven't? Maybe you're interested in IT?
Yeah, no. You know, I was mentioning the work we want to do with the First Nations community in this area. Grey Roots has been really fortunate to work with an advisory circle of community members from around the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. So we've started that work, and I think we're building some good relationships and friendships. But there's so much more we can do. And the past few years, we've been really focused on the redesign we're doing for our long-term exhibits here at the museum that focus on the history of Grey County. So we've been working with that advisory circle to increase the representation of the First Nations communities in that history and in those stories we're telling. But there's so much more we could do. And once we get that gallery done and dusted, then what's the next steps? And I know the staff here at Grey Roots are really open to big and small ideas. And I hope we can kind of explore that more. The other thing that's, like I'd love to do more with the museum is looking at the accessibility of some of our experiences here and how we make the museum welcoming and inviting place for people with different types of disabilities or abilities. So
what does that look like?
Absolutely. Like already in our exhibits, we have like auditory experiences, so places where you can hear the history. We have booklets, so if you're unable to enter into some of our heritage buildings, we have ways that you can experience what's inside there without physically going inside. But what could we do better? Like, could we bring in more technologies? Could we update some of our displays? Could we work with community members to provide, say, a sign language tour for community groups that might be beneficial for? So there's lots to explore there too. I think we could be doing more on that front.
I love that. Yeah, I guess when you're looking at like the heritage buildings like Morstan Village, you can't, it sort of takes away from the history if you add an accessibility ramp or something like that.
Yeah,
correct?
Some of the spaces we've added ramps, like despite the accuracy. They're kind of tastefully to the side but they are there. But there are still spaces like upstairs in some of the heritage buildings that the stairs are so narrow and they're like twisty.
Yeah.
So they're really not accessible for everybody, unfortunately.
Just something that piques my interest. How often are you going and just hanging out in those buildings? Because I love them.
I know. Even with this interview, I was like, I should go out into one of the heritage buildings, but the internet is so unreliable out there. So,
yeah.
But no, I love any chance I get to go out into the village and check things out is always fun. But I unfortunately am kind of stuck in this office most of the time.
Well, that's where all the important work gets done, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How many artifacts does Grey Roots have?
We have a pretty extensive collection. I think there's almost 16,000 artifacts.
Wow.
And that's one of my favorite places in the museum is to get a little sneak peek into collection storage. So you'll see there's just row after row after row of objects that are carefully stored and cataloged. And but yeah, it can be anything from pieces of art to pieces of pottery to who knows what. It's really an amazing collection.
And how many of those are on display right now?
I would say there are in the hundreds of items on display. We've actually, part of the redesign of the permanent galleries we have here, we chose a design that allowed us to change things up really often. And so we have a lot of flexibility with what we put out. And we have spaces for hundreds of objects. So, excuse me. So that's something we're really looking forward to, because sometimes we have community members come to us and they say, we have this object that we think could tell this particular story a lot better. And in the old design of the museum, we couldn't really swap things out. But now we can very easily. So we're looking forward to moments like that where we can, be representative of the community and have people have some pride in the objects that we have on display.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I can't wait to see. I always, like I said, I love your museum, and I'm always there and always excited to see new things that happen. So we're almost done so fast. I know. I've really enjoyed talking to you as well. What advice would you give someone that is maybe interested in history and is not sure where to start, or like you walked up to a curator and he discouraged you, but if you were in those shoes, what advice would you give a young you that approached and asked that same question?
I always want opportunities to tell young people that they can absolutely have a career in history. I feel like I'm like writing that wrong. But there are community museums in every town in Ontario. There are lots of positions. They might not always be hiring, but there's definitely an industry out there. And you never know where you might end up, but it's absolutely worthwhile pursuing. I would say that kind of like trusting your gut. That's advice that I still have to tell myself every now and then, is that, you can trust your gut. You just have to take those steps, like figure out what it is you need to do, go get those pieces of paper from the university, try to get those experiences and work your way up. I think there's a lot of support in the museum world for emerging museum professionals. There's lots of sort of like professional groups that are all about supporting young people in the industry. So I think it's a great career choice.
Volunteering, is there always room for volunteering?
Yeah, absolutely. Every museum, I would say, vast majority of museums across Ontario are really owe a huge debt of gratitude to the volunteers in the community, especially Grey Roots. We have, over 100 active volunteers, and we really couldn't do what we do without them, especially in Morstan Heritage Village in the summer when they're in their period costumes. So there's always ways to get that experience. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing to pursue.
Well, awesome. Well, Jill, thank you so much for joining me today on Her Story. I always like to end the program with a quote. And while I was researching you, I came across a famous historian, Mary Beard, who I was not aware of. And some of her quotes I just found hilarious. So I'm going to do the one. It's great fun being an academic because you have a certain license to be a bit of a joker. I don't know if you would agree with that or not. But the one quote that really stuck out to me is, history is not just learning about the past, but learning from the past for the present. Yeah. And I thought that was brilliant. So, Jill, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with me today.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
With Rogers TV, you can cheer on the home team from the comfort of your living room. We'll head to the rink, the field, the court, or the pitch, so you don't have to. Tune in and cheer on your local amateur athletes on Rogers TV.
Are you a passionate content creator ready to expand your audience reach? Do you have unique stories, captivating hobbies,